My name is Robert Hernandez. I'm a digital journalism professor at USC Annenberg in Los Angeles. I've been actually coming to AWE since 2010 when it was called ARE, and I was the only, one of the few only storytelling people, content people in the conference, which was very much driven by programmers and developers. And it's great to see the change that has happened to enable storytellers and the focus of content being essential to it. And we'll talk about a lot of partnerships that I found at this conference that allows us to do some pretty amazing things without having the budget of Gannett or the New York Times, which won an Augie Award. We were finalists for an Augie Award but didn't get it. But we'll talk about a few things. But first, let my panel introduce themselves. Jesse, go first.
Hi, I'm Jesse. I'm a journalist and filmmaker interested in visual storytelling on both emerging and traditional formats.
Hi, I'm Chaitanya. I'm a creative technologist at Emblematic Group. I design interactions in the virtual and augmented experiences and work on a volumetric VR platform on the web called Reach.
Hi, my name is Ralston Louie. I'm an interactive developer and designer. I'm interested in using photogrammetry and LiDAR scanning for interactive VR storytelling.
Hi everyone, my name is Alex Lee and I'm a graduate student at USC. I have some backgrounds in journalism, game development, and visual effects. And now I'm a creative technologist at Los Angeles Times.
So one thing you should know is that the vast majority of my students that take my hackathon style class have never done VR. Let's say they barely can spell VR. They've done video production, but they've not done the stuff that we in this industry see now. And one of the reasons for this talk is to demystify what is possible. And we do it under the name JOVRNALISM. It's pronounced JOVRNALISM. It's a little cute typo to the word journalism. See what we did there? It's trademarked now. And actually, my first crazy class was augmented reality journalism in 2013. In 2014, I was one of the dorks that took on Google Glass to try to figure out how journalism could be told through glimpses via a wearable. And in 2015, I created the VR journalism course, where again, 2015 is forever ago in this space, trying to figure out how could I get people to understand what is possible with storytelling in these immersive spaces. Since then, I've offered the class every semester. Students from different backgrounds come together, different majors. We have 2 journalism majors, a film major and an engineering major, electrical engineering major, all coming together, diverse backgrounds, diverse experiences, coming together to produce something. That something has ranged from, we went to DC and covered the Trump inauguration and the Women's March that got published by the New York Times and NPR. We've gone to Tijuana to do an immersive series about deportation. We've done stuff, we went to South Korea during the Winter Olympics and produced pieces for USA Today and some other folks. We've done some amazing shit and have no budget and a little experience, and it's problem solving, trying to figure it out, right? So we've worked, like I mentioned, with a variety of media companies. Our first project was with ProPublica, where we did a piece on how the Houston Ship Channel is a sitting duck for the next big hurricane. And we created a variety of experiences based on that, including a storm surge at 30 feet, so you get that sense of scale. NPR's run our stuff. We did a bunch of stuff with Reveal in terms of the drought and subsidence in California. Most recently, we did a piece with Contrast VR from Al Jazeera. We'll talk about that for most of the talk. But we've also, in addition to partnering with media companies, and one of the reasons why I partner with media companies, unlike Gannett and Ray, most of the media companies don't understand what is possible with this technology. There's a disconnect between media and storytellers who are like, no, I just figured out how to tweet. I don't know this other stuff that you're talking about. And then the tech side of the house, which is like, we're doing amazing tech. I don't care about your content, let alone turning around content on a deadline, right? We're kind of like the glue of those things coming together. So as I try to enlighten and inspire the media side, I'm also walking the expo halls and trying to convince these tech companies to think about us as an industry that is known for quality storytelling at rapid rate with quick turnaround, right? So the thing that Ray did with Notre Dame in an 8-hour turnaround, that's in our DNA as journalists. So I've been fortunate to work with a variety of companies, many of them that I've met here at AWE or CES or NAB, even though Metal, was purchased, or at least a plugin was purchased by Adobe. Chris Bobolis, he is a patron saint of this class amongst all these other companies that have donated or given us equipment, software, and support to pull off the projects that we'll talk about. Those projects have led to awards. We just won a Webby Award for our deportation series. We won the Shorty Award for our homelessness project that generated 2 million views on AJ Plus's site. We were a nominee for an Augie. I really want one of those ugly looking things ever since I've been here at this conference, 1 year. So yeah, we're not just doing neat things because we're testing out and R&Ding on this technology. We're doing things that have meaning and impact in order to inspire both sides to work together. And today's talk is about the Snapchat hot dog. Let me ask, who still has Snapchat? Let the record show 4 people reluctantly raised their hands. I know the Wi-Fi sucks, but download Snapchat. Do me a solid and download Snapchat if you had your account, because there are some experiences that I think are worthwhile for you to test out. First, did anyone ever do this AR experience, the dancing hot dog? Does anyone know the dancing hot dog? All right, for those who don't know, this thing came out. This is the original snap code for the dancing hot dog. When you take a picture, it does this. Can you put some music, the audio on? This annoying music goes on over and over and over as this hot dog dances. And it was one of the first big steps for AR, where you can bring this dancing hot dog into your reality. Holy crap, that's amazing. It's a dancing freaking hot dog. What I loved were all the memes that came from it. I'm going to let you take a moment to take them all in, including the meme that made fun of the idea of the Snapchat CEO saying, "I'm not worried about Instagram ripping us off. This is our future." And he brings out the dancing hot dog. This company, Snapchat, you can debate whether they're living or dying. They're still fairly strong, in my opinion. Instagram is clearly so ripping them off, and they have been ripping them off in this space as well. But we decided, well, what does the dancing hot dog have to do with journalism? We were trying to figure out how can we use AR to tell a story, to report a story, tell a story, and distribute a story, right? Again, we don't have the resources of the New York Times or Gannett, but we were trying to figure out if we can quickly capture optimized 3D assets through affordable means, and then tell compelling stories and distribute them, this unlocks a whole hell of a lot of stuff. It still kind of boiled down to 3 types of challenges. How do I capture, report the story? How do I capture the assets to make my story? What platform do I use to tell that story? Then how the hell do I get this to people? Pre-Snapchat, I would have to use Wikitude or Vuforia, or my first class in 2013, we used Mateo. Does anyone remember Mateo and the Junayo? Right? You're an OG, as it's being said, AROG. They were bought by Apple, which became Apple ARKit. We played with Junayo in 2013, trying to figure out how could we do step 2, produce a story, tell a story. But step 3 is a hell of a killer. I don't have the USA Today app reach or the New York Times app reach. If we made and we used all our energy to create an app, who the hell is going to download it besides my mom and the students, right? So we decided to hijack the dancing hot dog. Snapchat had a platform that has potential wide reach, and they released a product called Snapchat Lens Studio to allow people to create their own dancing hot dog. So for the rest of the talk, we're going to go and talk about the processes of the different aspects to produce this stuff, and tell you some of the learnings that we've done, some of the challenges we didn't foresee. We're going to focus on, a bunch of stories, but the main story that we're going to focus on is homeless realities. This is the one that won the Shorty Award. If anyone is from Samsung or knows someone from Samsung, all my contacts have moved on. But basically what I did was I took a little bit of my money and bought and made 360 VR kits that we then gave to the members of about 10 members of the homeless housing unstable community to train them on how to tell their own stories in 360 VR. While this technology is becoming more accessible and it's being democratized for more industries to tell stories, what often is happening is the underrepresented, underserved communities are being left out. So my hypothesis was like, everybody come together, let's see if we can pull this off. And at the LA Public Library Central Branch, we did a multi-day training of members of the homeless community so they can tell their own stories. So that's what we produced. If anyone knows Samsung to donate cameras, to give it to us so we can give it to underserved communities, please hook me up. But that's what we're going to talk about, the different aspects of how we produced a variety of stories around this theme and other projects that we've done. The first part of it, Alex, I'm going to pass down the clicker to you. Alex is going to talk about photogrammetry. Feel free to ask questions as we're in these sections. We're going to go through the process. So if you have a question about that process, feel free to ask. I might ask a couple questions, but we'll go through the chunks. We have an hour together, so let's have that conversation. Alex, talk about that process.
All right, this was when me and Jesse were working on like doing a test of like scanning a homeless tent.
It's my camping tent on campus. We found a bridge to put it as recreate an overpass.
Yeah, and we tried to put it like in the shadows in order to mimic the living conditions of homeless people. And for here, I would like talk more about the photogrammetries. So for me, I think doing photogrammetry is kind of like labor-intensive work, and also it requires lots of carefulness because no one wants to leave like even a small spot uncovered in your final models. And so I always put some math into the photogrammetries. I calculate the depth of field, and I measure the scale of the object before I really get started. And also, I always make plan before starting to actually scan the object. And some experience that I get is that make sure that you cover the full circle and guarantee to have at least 70% of the overlaps between each photo. And also it would be easier for post-production if the object of interest can at least cover 30% of the photo. And I think photogrammetry is a job that is easy for everyone to get started, but it's extremely hard to make it perfect. So I encourage everyone to try it, and finally, some tips. Never forget your SD card and quick release.
So with this one was the first time that we tried photogrammetry. We had done, has anyone looked at the Unity guide for photogrammetry? It's about an inch thick if you print it out. Really intimidating in terms of how to make photogrammetry for graphs and things like that for your game. We were trying to do it. What we try to do is for journalism to be quick, on deadline, good enough. And so sometimes you can plan that you're going to go do a costume. Other times you're at the location and you're running and gunning. In one case, while we were doing this story about homelessness, we met a guy who had a tricked out cart. And I was like, Alex, photogrammatize it. And he started to work it. The pattern that we learned is to do a circle around, taking pictures with, I think a 70% overlap is ideal, but it could be as low as 30% overlap between frame and frame. But your first pass is the whole object is within the frame as you complete the circle. And then you take pictures as you take a step closer to the object and then go around the circle again. But the object now is divided into three, top, middle, and bottom. Do the circle for the top, take pictures, circle in the middle, take pictures, circle at the bottom. And then the last bit is what's called kill shots. There was a debate, and I know, Jesse, you've taken a class too, between how do you take those pictures? Should it be vertical or a horizontal? And we read somewhere that the best is alternating between vertical and horizontal as you go around. What did you find, Alex? Does that make sense to do that?
Honestly, I think it doesn't matter whether you take it or switch it from horizontal to vertical, because as long as you covered like the object from every angles and every levels, it should be fine. And also the post-production software is pretty powerful, so in some extent it also helped the pre-production part.
So we were fortunate to get support from Reality Capture that gave us the license for capturing reality. I always get those two, the Capture Reality and Reality Capture is the software. Whatever it is, they're inverted. So this is a screenshot of that software. And if you click on the next one, this was our first test. And it turned out like, holy crap, we can do this. We didn't know exactly what we were doing. We're like monkeys on a computer, and it worked. And it was like, wow, there it is. This is a 3D model that we did, not knowing. We just took a bunch of photos. Do you remember how many photos they were?
I think it's about 270 photos.
We've done stuff as low as 70 photos as well, depending on the object. But here, the wind was blowing. Some of the tent poles you can't see, but for us, journalistically, it's hella good enough. But then we came across a problem we didn't anticipate, which is optimization. Holy crap. Next slide. Optimization. Jesse, talk about that experience.
Yeah, so after you have the capture process finished, and like Alex said, it's really more about you're just like taking pictures to capture the data rather than these beautiful pictures. In an ideal world, you'd put it through reality capture, which stitches them all into a 3D model, and it outputs a beautiful model that you can then use for AR. And that is an ideal world. What we found is what actually needed to happen is a lot of cleanup work. The story that I worked on specifically was a story about a woman, I think it's next. Her name was Ange. She had lived in her car, which she called affectionately Big Jimmy Red, for 2 years. And so kind of to take a step back, the process that we had already definitely confirmed is that we wanted to create a 360 video with Ange about her story. And we thought that AR, and specifically creating a 3D model of her car through photogrammetry, would be a really interesting way to advance that story. One thing that Ange said in one of our interviews with her was that when she was in her car day and night parked in the streets of Los Angeles, she often felt scared and afraid of the people that were walking by her on the sidewalk, which I think that, as a pedestrian, sometimes society actually feels fearful of the people that are living in, informal homes and settlements. And so we thought by allowing someone to actually see her video in 360 and then go inside her car and her space would be a really interesting way to hopefully kind of reduce some of that stigma. And so that's why we said, okay, let's do a photogrammetry model of her car. And
let me interrupt you because I forgot to echo that. While we were training members of the homeless community, we wanted to test out photogrammetry and see if we can do that. But also, the ambitious idea was, could we bring their dwellings into your space, and then you can step inside of those spaces? We had seen portal doors. Cool. We figured that out. But what if we use these objects as portals, but not just portals to another world, but physically go into their tent home or physically go into their car, and you get that sense of space and perhaps hold presence with them. That was the ambitious goal to do, and the car was one of the ones. Sorry.
No, fine. So that's why the first step in AR is to say, what is the goal here and what platform are you going to use? So that was the goal. And some things are easier to take photos of and create a model of than others. Unfortunately for us, objects that are shiny and transparent and plain in texture are really hard because the software has a hard time distinguishing and stitching it all together. So here's the photo of the car itself, and there's a photo of Ange. And when we did the model, here is what it came out as. As you can see, it looks like a car, but there are holes in it. The windows, if you look at her windows, some of them are half open, and then you could see through the car, and you could see some of the interior of the car, which it was a big mess, essentially. And there are ways to make that easier. You could have coded her car in something that would have made the photo stick, but this is her home. And this is a journalistic story, so we weren't able to really, as Ray said, we couldn't really, we had to work with how it was set up. And those were our constraints. So the key things of kind of how to optimize a model are fixing the geometry and then fixing the texture. The geometry needed a lot of work. The first step, to break it down pretty briefly, is you need to isolate what actually you want. When you're taking photos of an environment, oftentimes, especially outdoors, the reality capture, whatever stitching software you're using, pulls in the ground or trees nearby that it's capturing because it can't tell what you actually want to focus on. So you have to isolate what you want, and then you have to go in and essentially fix the holes. So that required adding polygons, essentially, and removing some of them. We had to kind of, I gutted the whole inside of the car because one of the biggest considerations during this process is creating a low poly model, which means you want as few as pieces of geometry that make up the car as possible. For some context, in reality capture, it was a few million, and we had to eventually get it down to 10,000, which chat will talk more about.
And do you remember the file size at the time?
I don't remember the file size.
Usually they're about hundreds of megs, if not a gig. And for us to do a Snapchat thing, and chat will talk about it, Snapchat file size total is 4 megabytes. So to take a 3D model down to 4 megabytes was a challenge.
Yeah. And so here's a photo of what it looks like. So again, the key considerations are first to fix all the holes, and there are lots of ways to do this, but what we did in a low resource environment was we used Maya and Substance Painter. So we used Maya to essentially fill and patch all the holes, and then to remove all the internal stuff, and then to also reduce the model to 10,000 triangles, which means it's only made up of 10,000 triangles, which you can see here. And one thing you want to keep in mind is you want to preserve the areas with higher detail. So if you could see, the top of the car is made up, it's a lot less dense than the back of the car because the back of the car had writing on it, so you want to preserve those details. So when you're getting down to the nitty-gritty, that's something to keep in mind. And so the ending model looked like this with the texture. The next step after you fix the geometry is to kind of fix the texture, what it looks like, the painting. And this is actually pretty important because if anyone went to Graham's talk on Monday, he was mentioning how one model, they kept reducing it, and the mangoes actually started looking like stones. And so in a journalistic context, there are lots of things we could have done to make this look better in the conventional sense, make it look more beautiful, smoother around the edges. But this was for journalism, and so for instance, unfortunately, Ange had a partner who had some violent outbursts and physically dented her car in lots of spots, and so the car was a little bit damaged, and we have to preserve that. And if you could see some of the lettering in the back, it was missing letters essentially, and it would have been a lot easier to just add the letter to make it more clear for viewers who wanted to experience it, but that wasn't something that we could really touch either. So the final model came out, and as Robert said, it worked well enough. I added windows. I ended up having to add windows just because the others were unusable. And it's not, so it worked good enough in terms of the model. How did it work as an app? Chat will talk more about that, but so what happened is it's not photorealistic, and trying to get it down to the size that Snapchat requires, you lose a lot, and it ends up looking somewhere between a 3D model and then a really bad version of a picture. And from an audience perspective, there's just not really a category for that. And in order to get people to go inside of it from a car, when you're interacting with a 3D model in AR, that's not very intuitive for someone to take their phone and shove it through a 3D model. And so a lesson learned here was having an entry point, like a tent did, that chat will talk more about, would probably have been something that we should have thought about, making it more clear that this model was something that users couldn't only spin around and zoom in and look at, but actually could go inside to see what the inside of her car looked like. which we did using a 360 video and photo, would have been something that we should have, the lesson was learned and we should incorporate going forward.
Yep.
Yeah.
So capturing the model, had you captured models before? Which number model was this for you?
No, yeah, this was number one.
This was number one.
It was a learning process for sure. I wouldn't recommend starting with a car.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend capturing a car. Don't do that. If we put a Volvo next to this one like Tony did in his talk, which one's CG? That one's like melted CG. On the next slide. Okay, go back a little bit. Here you go. So since then, since capturing, go back one more. Since capturing with DSLR and capturing reality, we've incorporated other capturing techniques. Upsididal, which makes structure sensor, who I met here in about 2010, 2011. They gave us a structure sensor, and we've been able to capture objects with that. HP lent me a demo unit of the HP Sprout. Has anyone seen the HP Sprout at all? For $500, that camera attaches to your computer, and you can rotate an object under that camera, and it edits out your fingers and creates an optimized 3D model. It's got to fit a certain type of parameters. Can't be shiny, can't be translucent, and can't be symmetrical. But in a few minutes, you have a 3D model, which for us, journalistically on Deadline, is pretty fantastic. We've also done volumetric capture with DevKit and HoloCap as well, who we also met here through AWE, has helped us and given us some licenses that we're looking to incorporate into the work. But like I mentioned, we focused on Snapchat, and one person had told me about Snapchat, and I'm trying to remember if coincidentally it was here at AWE last year that Snapchat was talking about Lens Studio. The next clip there. Lens Studio, you got it? You want me?
Yep.
Lens Studio came out for you to create AR experiences, and we thought we could use this to create those experiences. And I asked chat, figure it out, and here's this idea. Photogrammetry of a tent, I want to go inside it, I want to use Snapchat, could we do it? So talk about your experience. His answer was hell no.
So yeah, talking a bit about journalism, my past this was my second class in USC with professor. The first class, well, I was impressed by how the class is like, integrating all the innovative mediums, all the new mediums, experimenting with them for nonfiction storytelling. And we failed a bit with ARKit. We created a portal augmented reality story, but we failed at distribution because it was hard. You have to create an application, you have to publish on the App Store, and then you have to ask users to download that for like, what, 3-minute story? And no one is going to do that. So we had a hard law on distribution at that class. But then we like to experiment, and professor mentioned this idea of using Snapchat as a distribution tool, and my big answer was hell no.
In fact, when I spoke to Snapchat after they presented, I told them the idea, and they're like, that's a really fantastic idea. No, our platform will not do that. But
yeah.
as chat continued.
We like the idea that starts with big no. So we took this weird approach of Snapchat, and constraints were really big. Snapchat imposed a lot of constraints, and that just flourished our creativity. So how can we use Snapchat for doing augmented reality? Well, they already have the platform. They have the framework all designed for doing augmented reality thing, but how can we use that for like telling journalism stories? So they have some pretty good constraints. They have imposed 4 MB limit, like 4 megabyte. Even if you download a song, it will be more than 4 megabyte. So how can you import a whole 3D augmented reality content inside 4 MB? Textures, well, one of the really important thing for visual things is it should look good, and 2K textures for 3D, Jesse will also support that. It's just not good. And 360 videos. They were like limited videos because 360 videos are really huge, and you cannot have the whole 360 video inside, because if you do, that's clearly going to be more than, I mean, like even a second of 360 video is going to be more than 4 megabytes. And user interface, oh my God. That was a big one, because you have to abide with the rules of the Snapchat's user interface, because they already have some circles to take photographs and also to send it and search for friends. And you have to impose your own user interface on top of that to navigate through the story.
And before you move on from that, think about the Snapchat AR experiences. One is selfie, and I made myself into a little bunny or whatever, and I can open my mouth and I throw up rainbows, right? That's one. The other is, look, I put a dancing hot dog in our reality and I record video. What we were aiming to do is for you to interact with that object, do an immersive infographic, and also you to walk in there. And one of the things that was really important was audio as a cue for it. The problem is, I don't know if you guys are like me, but I mute my phone. So if you launch the object with a muted phone, you're not going to hear anything. So let's say you switch the audio on, you launch the AR experience. If your volume isn't up, you're not going to hear it. What happens when you try to turn up the volume in Snapchat? You take a damn picture. So it was a very clunky type of interface to try to get people to understand what we were trying to do. But we did all right.
Yeah, so I remember last summer when Professor mentioned, like, we have all the restrictions. Can we just put a photogrammetry model and a 360 video inside, so that when a user looks at the model and walks inside the model, he can see the video? And my idea was like, well, there are some really small models, so maybe we can try with the photogrammetry model, but I have doubts with the video, 360 video. And well, we can always try. It was cool, so it was the best place to fail. So we started off bringing, I talked with Jesse and Alex, and like, hey, can we optimize the model? Can we reduce this thing? And what can we do? So we started with the model, the really optimized, bad-looking model. But then textures did its job, because when you apply texture, it will add all the shadows and everything. So Jesse and Alex optimized the tent model that we captured. And this is an actual tent where actual dwelling of a homeless person. Well, he was homeless at that point of time, Jennifer. Now, after optimizing the model, we have to reduce the textures. So when you reduce the texture, there is a thing in Photoshop that you can do, which is compress the whole image. And when you compress it, we made a bunch of versions of those textures, and we were like just testing around, like, hey, can you spot the difference between these two? Because human eye has some limitations on finding differences, because when we are presented with something, our brain will understand, like, oh, okay, this is what something is going to be presented, and we neglect the flaws. So we tried with a bunch of textures and shadows, and when we applied those things, it just looked good. Then we coded a lot of interactions inside Snapchat. So we coded the camera. When camera comes inside the tent, you blow up and you start 360 photograph. That's the first thing that we did. And we tried that. We got some success, and we're really excited. I showed that to the class, and professor was like, okay, this is amazing. And it was a short-lived excitement, because the next moment was like, but we cannot tell story. And we were just left with 500 KB. It wasn't even a 1 megabyte. It was just 500 kilobyte of storage that we were left with. So what can we do with 500 kilobyte of storage? Well, we had some narratives. So we have audio recordings. We captured those recordings, and we chopped them down based on the hotspots. So looking at the tent, you can see there are some hotspots, blue buttons, which are like on the tent, over the cart. There is a chair there. There's a bag and all. So it talks about how a person in a situation is actually not, is really creative with his survival mode optimizing all the resources that it is using. And we compressed all the audio data, and then it created a cycle of optimizing audio data, which led to optimizing the model again so that we can have some more space. Optimizing the textures again, we were literally fighting for like 50 kilobyte. I remember that evening with Jesse, we were like, oh no, Jesse, can you remove few more textures? Can you remove few more things? Can we optimize few more triangles so that we can have one more audio character? And that was the thing. And so we designed these buttons which are like, which gives you cues. So when they're blue, and then we designed some interface over that, like, okay, if you're playing that, all the buttons should disappear so that a person do not get confused. And then once you have played that button, the color changes, and all those ideas were really brilliant. And we got a chance to experiment over those user interactions.
So we also, when we did user testing, we couldn't find a way to tell you to walk inside. So when we did user testing, we would just say, oh, walk inside the tent. And a couple of things that we noticed was, one, there was a point of entry, the doorway. Every single person, no matter where they were, would walk around the model and go through the tent. And every single person would be like, holy shit. We went to Snapchat and showed it to them, to the developers. We first showed it, we debuted it at a AWE night meetup of Snapchat in LA. And some of the OLC, the original lens creators for Snapchat, were like, how'd you do that? And he started to pick our brain and was like, wait, not yet. We got to publish our story first before we give it away. And then we were invited to the Snapchat Partner Summit. We were having breakfast with someone who happened to be one of the developers, and we showed her the thing, and she was like, I didn't know you could do that with our platform. Let's show, let me take over the clicker there. So if you happen to have Snapchat, that main snap code is the tent. You take a picture of that to unlock the lens. This is all interesting UI, but we also created 4 other pieces. Jesse's Big Jimmy Red car is in the upper corner. Mike, the random guy with the tricked out cart. And then there was a woman who uses art to keep herself mentally sane. We captured her tissue art. We experimented with different things. So what you do is you take a picture of it, and then you point to a place, and you tap to place the object there. This is what it looks like. What we did with the interface and created this into a template where the person introduces themselves and welcomes you. That was how we were going to give you context of the story.
And we're going to look around at my...
And then the buttons were there.
Yes.
So we decoded, the goal was to decode someone's tent. You might walk by and say like, that's just a lazy homeless person with an addiction or whatever. Here, she decodes how she lives. They're like freaking engineers. And then you can step inside and be inside her tent. Right? So I'm going to be selfish and ask you to give them a round of applause to do all that in under 4 fucking minutes. You had a question, sir?
My question was, so the inside is 360 photo?
We opted to do a 360 photo on the inside, right? And in Jesse's car, the front door was
360 video.
360 video, and the back side was 360 photo. So we experimented with that stuff there. We have a new project coming out, which is about found artifacts, migrant artifacts of the undocumented folks crossing from Mexico to the Arizona border along the desert there, a very deadly trail. We have created 3D models, and because we have the template, we interviewed a reverend who collects these artifacts, or doesn't collect them, shepherds them. Some of these artifacts have been used in carne y arena. And so we decode, again, the meaning of that upper corner, the upper right-hand corner. Those are called carpet shoes or sneaky feet, which are manufactured somewhere in Mexico, perhaps related to narcos, where they cut carpet and they make slippers that go over the migrants' footwear, so when they cross the desert, they don't leave footprints. The thing in the corner is a water bottle. All their water bottles are black or covered in black plastic because the shimmer of the water gives away their location and an agent can find them. So all these things we wanted to kind of talk about and humanize and put into context. That's our newest project. Chat, because we now have this templated, we want to share how people can do this. Snapchat, Lens Studio has fantastic templates. They still don't have our type of templates with hotspot interactives. So Chat has done a tutorial. I did a quick recording for my class, but we're going to clean it up and try to put it out there for the public. The next thing we want to talk about is what else is happening. I was going to put what's next, but it's more like leveling up, AKA more expensive and more complex. I'm going to pass this on to Ralston, who managed to get his hands on the Leica BLK. Has anyone heard of that LiDAR camera? It's about $20,000. I'll let you take it from there, sir.
Yeah, so in addition to photogrammetry this semester, we also explored LiDAR scanning with the Leica BLK 360. It's, like Robert said, it's a $20,000 laser scanner that is sort of revolutionizing the LiDAR point cloud scanning community. So we traveled to 3 different locations this semester and captured LiDAR scans of each of those places. We went to Catalina Island, the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles, and the US-Mexico border in Tijuana. And do we have time to play,
play the
a
video.
quick trailer?
So talk about what these are.
Yeah,
You
so
can
these,
turn down the volume on this one.
yeah.
Thank you.
So these are, this is sort of an overview of the different scans we captured using the LiDAR scanner. As you can see, we're hoping to use these scans to create a series of interactive VR tours. So we went to Catalina Island, and they're doing research on food waste recycling using black soldier flies, and this is the research container there. This is a scan of the US-Mexico border in Tijuana. And this is a hyperbaric chamber, dive chamber at Catalina Island that's used to cure divers who have the bends. And this is another scan of the border at Tijuana. This is the Tijuana River Valley. And lastly, that's the caribou diorama at the Natural History Museum.
And those are all point clouds.
Those are all point clouds,
Yeah.
yes. So that gives you sort of an overview of the point clouds that we captured. And one of the reasons why the BLK is such a revolutionary camera for LiDAR scanning is that it's extremely simple to use to capture the scans. We had a pretty efficient workflow. So if you want to capture at medium resolution, each scan takes about 3 minutes. If you want to capture at high detail, it takes about 5 minutes. And you want to do, for best practices, you want to make sure that your target object or building or whatnot, that you get line of full coverage and line of sight. So as long as you have enough scans to cover everything that you want to show, it's enough. So you can capture something like that research container we captured. The outside of it we captured in just 6 scans, which is pretty impressive.
And actually the Leica people were like, you can do things in 2 scans. We were interviewing the Leica folks, how would you scan this room? And the guy's like, oh, 4 scans, maybe 5 if you want to see the detail between every row. We were trying to figure out how many scans. We were doing like 12 on one or 17, trying to figure that out.
Yeah, so it's like the camera is very impressive for the amount of range and distance that it can capture. And so once you've captured the scans, you want to put them through a processing software. We used Autodesk Recap Pro. You can also use Leica's proprietary software called Cyclone. And so it's pretty easy to put them into the software and process them. These are some of the snapshots of the scans after they were processed in the software.
One to point out is that polar bear one, that is 1 scan. So 1 scan, we did 1 test of the diorama in the museum. We just put it in the front with a window in front of it and scanned it, and what came back was pretty jaw-dropping. 2 scans would capture enough that you could do this and see the 3D model of the polar bears.
Mm-hmm. And in the bottom right, you can see the caribou diorama. We were actually able to work with the taxidermist at the Natural History Museum and go inside and place the sensor inside. So we got full coverage, both front, back. So when you actually view the scan in VR, you can walk around and teleport around and see the caribou from every angle, which is pretty fascinating. And I'll talk more about how I did that. And then these are a few more of the scans. This is a bottle house of the Tijuana border that's made of recycled bottles. And then, so challenges, like in the photogrammetry process, one of the major challenges for point clouds, because the object was to get these point cloud scans into virtual reality. So the toughest part was figuring out how to optimize the point clouds and get them into VR.
In fact, the first goal was to put it in augmented reality in Snapchat, and we were quickly realized that is not happening. That is not happening.
Pretty much an impossibility for the full point clouds. So the idea, I worked with one of the lead people at Leica in figuring out the workflow of how to convert the point clouds into a 3D model that's viewable in VR. And their workflow is to first put it through Recap or their proprietary software, and then get it into a software called 3D Reshaper. So you put the point cloud into 3D Reshaper, convert it into a 3D mesh. But the mesh is extremely dense. I think even when I was just trying to crop like a certain section, it was 50 to 100 million polygons, which is impossible in VR, right? Like the limit is 2 million. So then you have to figure out how to optimize that 3D model and get it down to 2 million using a software like Simplygon, which is sort of the fastest, but isn't like the best, or using a more nuanced approach like Maya and ZBrush. But the problem is that even after reducing the model down, it just doesn't look very good. So there's just like a lot of loss in quality. So what sort of a game-changing software that I came across and got beta access to is Atom View. So what Atom View allows you to do is take your full dense point cloud and automatically put that into virtual reality using their UE4 plugin. So I was able to put the point clouds into Recap, export an E57 file, which is a point cloud file, and drop that into their Atom View software, which does some optimization, and then take that from Atom View, which exports what's called an AVC, an Atom View cache file, and put that into UE4. And then I was able to, I unfortunately don't have a snapshot of it, but I was able to get the caribou diorama, the entire diorama, including like other parts of the museum that were scanned, drag and drop that into UE4, and then make it instantly viewable in VR, which was pretty incredible given like the struggles I had doing the other process. So the conclusions about this is that like combining the Leica BLK 360, which sort of democratizes point cloud capture, combining that with Atom View, which is a software that makes the workflow of getting a point cloud scan into VR almost instantaneous, is going to sort of revolutionize and democratize photorealistic content production for VR and AR using point cloud scanning. And yeah, that's sort of the main takeaway.
And so this semester was about climate change and pollution. So previous semester homelessness, this semester was climate change and pollution. And while we can't put it in Snapchat, we got to think what's beyond the dancing hot dog. And there are more platforms that are enabling us potentially to take the Leica scans in there. One is Emblematics Reach. If you haven't used it, it is something to check out, reach.love. Mozilla folks have been doing training with Reach. Are they still doing that?
Yeah.
How do folks find out where they can go get a training?
So Mozilla has a developer roadshow where Reach is being premiered.
So you can go Google that, find it, and if it's happening in your town, they did it in LA, I got to do it, to put the models into Reach is really, really easy, surprisingly easy. So that for us as distribution is a game changer. The quality of reach is I can send you a URL, and through that URL on your phone, on your desktop, or in your headset can have access to it. The web browsers are another thing that is changing it. And actually, before I move the web browsers, Hubs by Mozilla, they're rolling that out. It's pretty fantastic as well. I can import a 3D model potentially, and that is the space that I have my room. So it's like private alt space, VR type of rooms. The browsers are, web browsers are essential. Oculus browser and Magic Leap Hilo. If we can port and make browser-based experiences, then we can port it onto multiple platforms. And of course, Instagram is ripping off Snapchat, and so they came out with Spark AR. Chatted with those folks at F8. As of right now, Instagram now goes and supports 4 megabytes. So we can potentially port over our Snapchat experience into Instagram and have a wider reach. But their platform and the reading has not as stable as the Snapchat experience has been. But we're testing that out in other Facebook-related products like React 360 for 360 video, and we beta tested some stuff in Facebook Spaces. We are constantly playing with different hardware and technologies. We got a LED fan to figure out how the hell do you tell a story with this when there is no audio. We've done stuff with sensors and testing some stuff out there. If you have tech or know someone that has tech, we are storytellers and we hijack all technologies, not just dancing hot dogs, to tell stories. You've heard the message here throughout this conference. I want to echo it. I'm so glad that it's being said. Content is king. You cannot have this medium without content. Cool tech alone is not enough to sustain it. Cool storytelling alone is not enough to sustain it. It's these two coming together. We need each other to work and collaborate, and you don't need to be the New York Times or USA Today to tell these compelling stories. It's not about the technology or the device. It's about the compelling content optimized onto that device to create these compelling experiences that are going to make our industry survive. We have just a few minutes for questions. This is all our social stuff. Thank you for sticking around with us for the hour. Please, I'm so proud of my students. Give them a round of applause as I take a selfie with them. Look this way, y'all. Questions? Cool. All right, thank you guys. Enjoy the rest of the conference.